Yes, I think let's go ahead and get started. Take it away, Mary Ellen.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so excited to have you folks here. There's a good number of people here. And our topic tonight, as you can see on the slide, is filling the gap in your teaching. At the beginning of our webinar, we always make sure to review some Zoom practices. You should be able to see us and the panelists clearly with this guidance. If you are on a laptop or on a desktop computer, that is preferred over a mobile device, so that you can see the share and ourselves clearly. We also have voice interpreting in progress. If you'd like to hear our presentation tonight, you can go ahead and listen to the voice interpreters. We also have caption services running. There is an icon at the bottom of the Zoom software that says closed caption. If you tap on that, it should give you the menu to turn on the subtitles. If you are having any technical issues, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We have a support team here ready to help you behind the scenes. In terms of using Zoom, make sure you have the most updated version of Zoom possible. And you can see on the screen between the panelist and the share screen, there's a slider bar. Just hover your mouse over that area and you'll have that indicator bar appear. And then you can click on it and adjust the screen to your preference. Also, there's no need to take copious notes during tonight's presentation. We will be sharing the resources so that you can sit back, enjoy, and watch the conversation.
Exactly.
If you would like to ask a question, we have a Q&A box that you can enter your question in. You can also ask via video. That would be towards the end. We'll make sure that we address everyone's questions before tonight is over. Again, in terms of technical issues, or you need some type of technical support, use the chat for that and ask a question. If you happen to see a question in the Q&A box for the presenters that you'd like to ask but is already there, you can go ahead and click like on it and that will upvote your question and that will reprioritize the questions, and we will make sure to address everyone's question towards the end of our presentation. We also want to recognize CSD Learns and the Wells Fargo Foundation for providing funding for tonight's event. We're grateful to both organizations, as our webinar series would not be possible without their support. Now, a slide about us. The faces you're starting to get used to seeing every month. I'm Mary Ellen Graham, and I work here in Austin, Texas. I'm at the Texas School for the Deaf. I'm an online resources project specialist for the deaf and hard of hearing students throughout the state of Texas. And I have my amazing co-host next to me, Todd.
We're so glad to have you back, Mary Ellen. Glad you survived the storm.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people have asked me how I survived, and I made it through quite all right.
Is it warm again?
It's not even warm, it's hot. It's in the 80s. My goodness.
Well, good to have you here. My name is Todd Bonheo, and I am a professor at Gallaudet University. I teach many different courses, math, informational technology, things that have to do with finance. But one class that I work in is personal finance. And so I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk about today's presentation. And that's what our webinar goals this evening are going to be, which are listed here on this slide. What we're going to be doing this evening is to identify where the struggles are for adults who have graduated from high school but didn't go to college. They tend to struggle with some personal finance issues. And then we want to talk about what are some of those possible causes for the gaps in the knowledge of personal finance. And finally, to share some ideas of how to fill in these gaps. Hopefully, these gaps won't stay with people. They'll be able to fill them in so that we know where these gaps are and we can fix that going forward. Fortunately, we have two guests that will be joining us this evening. We have Sam Brady and we have Susanna Henderson. So if you guys want to turn your videos on and let's say hello. Hi. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here. Before we go on, I want to let the two of you introduce yourselves, your name, where you're from, what your job is, what your experiences are regarding personal finance. We'll start with you, Sam.
Good evening, folks. I am Samantha Brady. I am a high school math teacher at CSD, School for the Deaf in California, Fremont. And a quick background about myself. I grew up in New Jersey. I was mainstreamed with a hearing family. I went to RIT for a BA and MS degree. My BA is in applied mathematics, and my MS from graduate school is in education focused on deaf and hard of hearing. And then I ended up in Fremont, and I've been teaching at Fremont for 9 years now.
Fantastic, Susanna. So my name sign is like this, Susanna, and the reason it's kind of awkward, it's because I'm from Southern Africa, and the sign names are using pictures instead of letters. So that's why my sign name is like this, because at that
Nice.
time, my hair used to be down like that at a bob. So I was born in Malawi. And when my family, I have a hearing family, and when my family found out that I was deaf, we moved to South Africa so that I could have an education. And when I graduated, I went to Gallaudet University, majored in math and secondary education. I got my master's degree in deaf education. And I was teaching at MSSD in Washington, DC. I was teaching geometry. And then Gallaudet University reached out to me, and I started to work there. And I've been at Gallaudet University now for 8 years. And I teach quantitative reasoning and applied mathematics. So really, it's a lot to do with finance and statistics. Great. I'm glad to have you both here. It's nice to have some perspectives. We've got a high school teacher perspective for those who might not be going to college, as Samantha, and then we've got Susanna here giving this perspective of those that are already in college, and we can talk about what some of the gaps are as we go forward in the next 50 minutes. So I'm excited.
Cheers. Folks that have been with us, you know that we love our polls. We love to gauge the audience's thoughts, and we like to take note of what you're thinking. So with that said, we'll start tonight's poll. And speaking broadly in broad terms, with the majority of students who leave K through 12, do you feel they are prepared to manage their finances confidently, not maybe in a fearful, awkward way, but with confidence? What do you think about that? Please respond to that. And for the panelists here, the 4 of us, we can't vote. Every time we have a poll, I want to vote, but realize I can't. I don't want to get too deep into this subject because, of course, we could have a long discussion amongst the 4 of us after seeing our poll results, especially this question.
I have to admit that I was not ready when I graduated K through 12. I was not ready for my personal finance goals. I had to learn the hard way not until I got older that I finally fill in those gaps.
You and I both.
This is Susanna. Yeah, me too.
And I'm curious, Susanna, you came to the States from South Africa. And when you did, were there any challenges for you as opposed to living in a different country with a different finance system?
Yeah, this is Susanna. It was different. In a perfect system, $1 is equal to about $12 or 12 Rand, which is what our economic system was in South Africa. And so to help prepare me, I really had no idea until I went into the undergraduate. I didn't understand personal finance. That wasn't something that we learned about. So the first time I learned about quantitative reasoning, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so eye-opening. And so now, thank you to that quantitative reasoning class. Teachers learn the most when they teach. And that's something that, we learn as we're teaching. So, do we have those poll results? Let's see if we can show those poll results.
Of course.
Wow.
Right. Wow. Samantha says, that's not surprising, though.
This is Todd. Well, that's why we're here.
This is Mary Ellen. 42 people, 80% said no. One person, which counted as 2%, said yes. That pretty much sums it up for our question.
I'm not surprised, honestly. I'm not surprised.
And this actually segues right into our next question, which is on the screen. I'd like to ask you both, our panelists, what are the biggest weaknesses in relation to finances that you've noticed among individuals who are 18 years or older? We're not talking anyone younger than 18, but those who are 18 or older. Have you noticed anything, Sam? This is Sam. I think it goes back to exposure in terms of how to use a bank account, how to budget, and a person's understanding of interest, APR, annual percentage rate, and having an experience in functionally operating your bank account. I think that's where people struggle the most. Also, another thing are credit cards.
Also, they don't have any real life experience. Maybe people have talked about it around them, but they've never actually opened a bank account, had a credit card, had a checking account or anything until after they're the age of 18.
Exactly. And it also depends if these kids have had a job. Most kids don't have a job at 15, 16-year-old. So they really lack that experience. And of course, there are diverse experiences for everyone. But the job experience itself requires one have a bank account. And then that also lends itself to having a direct deposit, understanding your tax forms, bank accounts. And so a lot of students aren't exposed to that. And perhaps that would be a reason why their skills are lacking in terms of finance.
This is Susanna. Yeah, I want to add one of the things that I notice is where students are really struggling with utilizing Excel. Students are kind of awkward and they don't know how to use it. Just three simple functions: equal FV, future value, equal the present value, equal the monthly payments. Those types of things on Excel, which are quite simple, seems to really confuse students. They're not used to that with Excel. And I think that the weakness is, we use My Math Lab, which is a course under Pearson. Pearson, that company, has created it. They don't provide Excel videos in ASL format. And so students aren't prepared for that. And so they need to get used to utilizing Excel, and they struggle with that. And having to transition to Excel, and students are just dependent on a calculator. That's all they know how to use. So of course, that's a struggle and that's a problem. When they have things in brackets, they might miss additional brackets with the formula in Excel, and therefore their answers are not correct. So I think that that's a problem. Rounding errors. The courseware for MATLAB has two different places for rounding errors. And if a student is answering with a 3 decimal places instead of 2 decimal places, that messes it all up. And so the students are struggling with that because they don't know how to round. That seems to be a struggle. Percentages as well. Percentages are a struggle. They don't know how to divide and determine and figure out the percentage. So that seems to be a struggle.
This is Sam. I really agree with that. You just mentioned percentages, decimals, and going back and forth. And I also agree with your comment about Excel. Excel is fantastic for budgeting. There are plenty of functions within the Excel system where one doesn't have to sit at a calculator and type those out. Excel does all the dirty work, right? Which is really nice. And so people should know how to use it. When I teach and I realize that somebody lacks that understanding, I try to do some fill-in education at the same time that I'm teaching. For example, someone might not know how to divide, so I make sure I get that across to them. They might not understand how to use percentages, but there are plenty of gaps in math skills that can affect or impact their future in life after graduation. And this is Mary Ellen. Sam, I'm curious, because I understand you both are talking about Excel. And I know that Todd in the past When we've talked, he's mentioned that he relies on Excel as well. But Sam, do you typically use that at the high school level? Or are you using it in computer class? Is there another time where students are exposed to it? Because there really is no time where Excel is a focus or even a unit, right? And this is Samantha responding. Anytime I use Excel is typically during a project. We use a state-directed curriculum, which has, of course, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, Calculus, and all that curriculum. But it's up to a teacher really to figure out when you can work in the Excel discipline. But there is no curriculum that dictates when has to use Excel. It's just as long as the teacher can apply it within that lesson.
So I wanted to add with Excel, what I learned about Excel, which was cool, the course, there's a video, it's a new video that just came out in 2020 talking about Excel. And so I'm thinking about switching to utilizing the video aspect of Excel. It's really nice. This is Todd. So to kind of summarize, we're talking about skills, transitioning decimal points to percentages. Students seem to be weak in that area. Students also might be able to use Excel, and if they could leverage and understand how to use it, it would be great, but they haven't had any of those opportunities. And to use that for their own personal finance, it's very overwhelming if they've never used Excel before, because it's a new platform to them. And then also students don't really have that real life experience unless they've had a job, get a check, opened a bank account, and know how to utilize and budget. So it seems that these are the three themes that are showing as weaknesses for our students. Is there a fourth that we should add? I think financial literacy would be the fourth to add, to be honest. I don't know if students are struggling. They're like, this is new information. I don't know what this is. How do I find this information? Where do I learn it? I notice a lot of students don't have the skills in just financial literacy, how to use Google for certain things. Yeah.
Well, it's not in sign language. It needs to be accessible.
You know, they have calculators that'll tell you what your monthly car payment might be if you put in all of this information. But students don't know how to find those websites to use those calculators. They don't know how to search for that. So I think that information literacy is really what's important, that they don't know how to find what they're looking for. This is Susanna. Also, I think it goes to reading capabilities. Word problems. Students truly struggle with word problems and figuring out which formula to use to solve a word problem.
This is Samantha speaking. I'd like to share something that blew me away recently. I was having a conversation with some former students, and I just happened to ask if they felt ready to enter the real world after graduation. I asked if financially they felt prepared. The responses across the board were like, no. One person said, I had no idea about savings. I kept ending up broke and I didn't know I couldn't save any money. So that was one struggle that was mentioned to me directly. And they said after learning about savings, it completely changed their life. Another student told me that they had purchased a car, but didn't really understand or realize what the APR meant until they received their first bill. They didn't understand why the payment kept going up. When they finally were explained what the APR meant, they were upset that they had to make those types of payments. So it was a little shocking to them, right? APR, annual percentage rate, has to do with interest. And if they don't even understand what interest means, it could lead them into some trouble in life.
To add to Sam's comment regarding car payments, I had my own experience with that because they would take a down payment. But they wanted over 50, unless you were giving over 50% of the down payment, they wouldn't let me buy the car because your credit score. I didn't understand the whole concept of a credit score. So that was really hard. So I think students need to understand that they need to build credit to be able to purchase a larger item. And that's something that I now share with my students about building their credit and having a good credit score. And it's really important to have all of that, because I think there are some times that students don't realize how important that is. It applies to a car, getting an apartment, housing. There are many things that a credit score is so important for.
It
So to
impacts
wrap
many
this
areas.
up,
So
this
true.
is Todd. In my biology class, if you missed something or you didn't understand something, it might not impact your life. It might not be such a big thing. But in personal finance, if you don't understand something and you get into a loan situation that you don't understand, or it messes up your credit, you become in debt trying to figure out what happens with your family, with your relationship and your personal issues, it's really a struggle. I mean, that's a lot more impactful to students than missing something in biology. So I think that that's why this is really important for us to teach, and for our teachers to support, and so for our teachers to support this learning and opportunities for our students. We need to record a video. You need to make a video. Yeah, you've got that. Oh, very cool. All right, let's go to this is Todd. Let's go to the next poll. All right, so we've got another poll question. So, is it easier or harder for deaf and hard of hearing students to learn about finances compared to their hearing peers? Do you think it's harder for deaf students, or do you feel like it's the same whether you're deaf or hearing, or do you think maybe it's easier for deaf students? Let's go ahead and vote. Anybody want to share their experience? What do you guys think? You think it's harder, easier, the same?
This is Mary Ellen. I think it's harder. And honestly,
Why?
the biggest thing I think that we talked about before is that incidental learning that you just hear other people talking about, right? Maybe I don't know anyone who's just bought a car, but maybe I hear a conversation out somewhere and people talk about that subject. And you can develop or garner some understanding about it. And so because we lack that incidental learning, we lack that superficial knowledge. And I think that's a big impact.
Before we continue, I want to show the results. Let's see the results of the poll.
This is Mary Ellen speaking. Wow, the numbers are close.
Yeah, so about 25, about 70% say, yeah, it's harder. And then about 10 people, 28% feel like it's the same, deaf or hearing. And one person says, no, I think it's easier.
This is Mary Ellen. Todd, did you say 25%? I saw 69%. It was 25 people
No, almost 70%,
responding at 69%.
25 people.
I was just making sure I saw it correctly too.
So that will lead us actually to our next question. And this kind of goes to our recent poll. So for those of you that thought it was easier or harder, can why? Why do we think it's easier or harder for our students to learn about finance?
Susan, did you want to speak to this or should I go ahead?
Sam, you go ahead. This is Susanna. You go ahead, Sam.
Thank you so much. This can be a tough subject to discuss, I have to admit, but I'll speak from the heart and I'll speak my truth. When you compare curriculums between hearing students and deaf instruction, they're similar. Neither group learns about finance, really, unless there's an elective class that will cover it. I would say both hearing and deaf students experience a similar level of frustration. And Mary Ellen, thank you for mentioning that. You mentioned incidental learning. Now that is a difference between hearing and deaf students or youth. Hearing people hear the conversation, they don't even realize they're learning. They can be walking down the street and pick something up. Deaf youth don't have that. Hearing youth can hear people talking about buying a car, talking about how horrible it was having to put a deposit. Now that word may ring a bell in their mind, deposit, and they might investigate what that means. When you compare that to a deaf youth who lacks the hearing to catch that conversation, they wouldn't have that exposure. They would need to be exposed to it with intent, purposefully. So that is what creates the difference, is that incidental learning. And there isn't always access to information for deaf youth. Maybe, and I don't know what the number is, but it might be 70% of the information that the hearing peers have is accessible to deaf students or deaf youth. And also something to keep at the back of our mind is that not all deaf students are fortunate enough to have communication access that their hearing peers or counterparts might have. The family of a deaf youth might not use sign language. There might not be any conversation at home. And that's a huge impact. So I would say that it's just a little tougher for the deaf youth than their hearing peers. That's what I would say.
So this is Susanna. This semester, I decided to add some interview questions regarding the financial part 1 and part 2, part 3. Talking about budgeting is part 1, talking about savings, and then the third is talking about loans. So that's something new. And so I had students interview their parents and their friends and other family members. And I noticed that those students that had hearing parents, or at least a hearing mother, they didn't know that it was like 11% interest. And different students were asking different questions and learning a lot of things. And so I think that often even hearing parents don't understand. They don't understand, the difference between that age group of 18 to 34. And they don't realize that there are assistance programs out there to help them to purchase a home. I'd say 91% of, not 91, sorry, 67%, almost 70% of my students' families said they owned a home. And 73% of them from ages of 18 to 37 had no idea that there are assistance programs out there to help you. But this is deaf or hearing. I think it was both. And, I shared my mistakes as a deaf person with some of my students and explained to them some of my challenges about my parents not having told me about certain things and about what programs are out there to help you and how you can start asking questions and learning about that.
And this is Mary Ellen. Do you think that personal finance is a taboo subject and people don't want to talk about it? Perhaps because they feel it's too prying, and it's like, no, this is my business. I don't want to talk about that. People seem to beat around the bush when it comes to it, but you said you just admit your mistakes and said, yeah, I screwed up. Yeah, I had penalties. Yeah, I've learned. So I wonder what makes everyone so afraid to talk about finance. Samantha here. I think one of the reasons it's so scary to talk about is always going to be a mystery to us. But I do have another a hard truth to share. Quite often, deaf students or deaf youth live a sheltered life. Parents will hold back the truth if their finances are off and don't want to share that information, and they hold off being real with them. This is Mary Ellen. Also, it's a difficult communication to have. And when it comes to money, parents might say, here, let me just take it and keep it for you, instead of providing some dialogue as to why that is being done. Now, me personally, I appreciate that my mom let me mess up my finances. And I learned a lesson. And I was like, Mom, why didn't you warn me? And she said, you learned your lesson. At that time, I wasn't able to appreciate that experience. But now I look back and ask myself, how else would I have learned? So, Samantha, I think you're right. Some deaf youth are sheltered, but of course, there's no one cookie cutter way that people are sheltered. The experiences are different across the board, right? You can't apply that on a general level, can you? And this is Samantha responding. I think I can respond to that in terms of myself. Growing up, I never really questioned my parents on finance. I was busy with my academic life. I was also a dancer. I was at the studio quite a bit. I was involved in school, and I didn't have time for a job. So when I got to college, I realized I did have some frustration, but there were also tools, and I used those tools. And I asked my parents. I became a little more assertive. I said, what is this? What is that? When it came to finance. Now, do other students have those types of tools as well? Who knows? Are they assertive? Are they going to ask? Who knows? Because we're not all the same.
Yeah, I agree. Whether it's easier or harder might not be the issue. I think it's more about access to information. Like we had mentioned, deaf and hearing, everybody has the same curriculum. Some states teach certain things, other states don't. But if you can communicate with your parents and ask them these questions, I mean, a lot of hearing parents will talk with their hearing students about their hearing youth about this. But some parents that don't have the same language as their deaf youth and their deaf children, and they can't communicate, may not have that communication. And how do they have those types of conversations if they're not using the same language? So really the issue becomes communication, and that's where schools need to step in. And language deprivation.
There's also language deprivation, right?
Absolutely. And to get that information, where's that information gap coming from? Where's that access coming from? And I think the issue here is what happens after graduation? Who are these students talking to?
Right. Usually left on their own is who they're talking to. Mary Ellen says, yeah, they're told good luck.
One thing that I always do with my students is I offer my availability to these students. And I say, hey, you can talk to me anytime about whatever you need. Don't feel like, oh, I'm a teacher and I'm only here for this class, and after you graduate, I'm no longer accessible to you. That's not how I approach my students. Once you've met me, once you've been my student, I'm your resource for life. You have access to all of the information I have. If you have questions, please feel free to contact me. And so therefore, I hope that the students will, and they, and I provide my availability to them. And you never realize, maybe when they're 30 and they have a family, and then they're like, okay, now who do I talk to? Now, where do I get this information from? So I think it's important to be open and allow them to have access. This is Susanna.
Samantha, completely.
This is Susanna. I think that, deaf children are told, don't have credit cards, don't get a car loan, don't do all of this, because they don't have access to it. They need to build their credit scores. And instead, they need advice about how to use the bank, how to put their name on their electric bill. Maybe you have an ally bank that will help you to become independent and challenge you to not necessarily only do what your parents are doing, but actually set things up for yourself. You need an ally, you need a mentor, somebody to help you. How do you fill out this application? You have to have time and you have to have patience with them. And then other students will ask questions about credit cards and how do you apply for a credit card? And how, do you make sure that you're not being tricked by this credit card company with a high interest rate or anything? And so if you have, I can negotiate for a lower interest rate, that would be great. There are so many deaf students that don't realize that they can negotiate for that. I think we better continue. We've got a whole many more questions. We could talk about this all night and all day, as we all realize. So let's go on to the next question.
This is Mary Ellen. Thank you, Todd. Yeah, that's right. Now, if we can move the slide forward, our next question is a did you know question. So we did some research and found out that 4 in 5 youth failed a financial literacy quiz. And what's interesting was the age range. The age range was 18 to 34 years old. That group did the worst. Folks who were 55 years or older scored much better. And I think it's true because when I look back, I talked to my parents, they have more experience. They had a home economics course, they had woodshop. I think they had more exposure when they were younger compared to the youth nowadays. And we can see, as evidenced by the number of failures, I think folks assume that people just have this knowledge on their own. But I think those numbers are quite surprising, and we need to do something to change this.
This is Todd. I want to add something to you. So I asked my parents once, I asked them, how old were you when you got your first job? And they said they were 14. I mean, they worked at an ice cream shop and the other one worked for some insurance, doing like filing at an insurance company or something. Yeah. So do we see 14-year-olds having jobs? Of course not. There's laws about that. Some states you have to be 16 or
16,
17.
I think. Yeah.
And so the job opportunities for our youth to earn money and to learn about these things, to fill out forms, to do their taxes are minimal. They don't have that until they leave the nest. So what do? You know, parents, what, are going to give out their kids fake money, give out fake forms, all of these kinds of things. So as you know, if they don't have any life experience to apply to this, these little things keep, you know, are gaps for them. This is Susanna. So I saw on Facebook that Algebra 2 should be dropped in school and instead they should be teaching financial literacy. That was a good question on Facebook. I thought that was a good topic. I mean, it was a different focus.
And this is Samantha speaking. A friend of mine is just about 42 years old, I think, if I've got that correct. And they were telling me a story about their parents just going out randomly one night to the front of the restaurant and saying, okay, get off and get an application. And I was like, well, what's going on? They were like, you're going to open an account here. And I was like, what? They said, yeah, you're going to get a job and you're going to do that right now. So this friend walked into the restaurant, got an application, filled it out. And then right after that, their parent drove them to the bank. And back then, right, you had to make your deposits manually. You had to put down your routing number, your account number, and you had to turn that in. And it was a very hands-on experience. And back then, people were on it. They were like, get out and work, get going. Mary, this is so true. Now the focus is academics, and they say go to college instead of going to work. So I think the focus has shifted a bit from employment to college mentality. People think you have to complete college first, then get a job. And I might be wrong, but that's just my observation of the world currently for our generation.
This is Todd. That's really interesting.
Mary Ellen says, yeah, I would agree with that. But we have to move forward to our next question, our third question for the night. How can we bring in more personal financial literacy courses while teaching in the classroom? Like Samantha mentioned, there are a lot of state requirements that have to be satisfied. And so what is replaced? Like was already mentioned by Susanna, should Algebra 2, Algebra 1 be removed and replaced? Now, if nothing can be removed and all the curriculum that is listed by the state or required by the state has to be taught, then how do you work it in? This is Samantha responding. For folks who lack any teaching experience, we as teachers need to meet, for one, curriculum timelines. We have to comply with that. For two, any IEP mandates. We have to make sure we satisfy those goals. And then there's also, for three, standardized testing. There is a law called No Child Left Behind, which has its own requirements and stipulations. We have to teach these kids up to standard so that they meet a satisfying score in state standards, as well as admission testing, like ACT or SAT for college. And so that's a lot that we have to work with. So we don't have a lot of time left over for real life application. The curriculum is scaffolded and staggered, where there's geometry, algebra 2, leading to calculus, and so on and so on. And the classes that would really benefit deaf youth in real life are electives. They're not mandated at schools, and they're not required unless the personal finance class is considered a part of a pathway for a specific student. So that's what the situation is. So I, as a teacher, try my best to add some tidbits and some examples worked into the lesson plan. Like, for example, I work on figuring out percentage. And then I ask, what are the applications for percentages? And that's where I can work in interest rate, investing, and how interest applies there, and how interest rates work, basically. And so I like to supplement them with exposure to these subjects. But the truth is, I don't have enough time to do what I'd like to do. I would love to spend more time in that area, but I can't. Maybe I can take the first 5 or 15 minutes of class to talk about real life applications and hash that out. And maybe they can bring their own portfolio, their personal finance portfolio, so they can make notes and take notes of that. And it doesn't have to be personal finance. I'm sure we can work it into something else like a math problem where we can fill in the gaps, and they can save that as a resource for the future as their own personal notes. And or also, it really depends on the class schedule. If it's a block schedule and I teach full class on Monday or Wednesday, then maybe I can take 30 minutes out of that block schedule to go ahead and do some instruction in terms of personal finance. So the truth is, there are plenty of ideas, I would say, and we just have to go ahead and meet that impulse and start working in these areas of teaching.
I want to thank CSD Learns, the video that have been created. I utilize that in my teaching with my courses, with my quantitative reasoning class. I think it's great. And you can see the conversations and the discussions and the things that are happening in all of the different modules. I think there's like over 31 questions. And CSD Learns developed this, and it was wonderful to be able to utilize that. And so I ask our students to watch the videos and answer those questions. So thank you, CSD Learns, for creating this, because I'm definitely doing things with this. This is Todd. Yeah, they need more videos. Come on, CSD Learns, put more videos, more resources. You know, hearing students have so much access and so many things with credit cards, banks, and taxes and investment. But as deaf students, we don't have that much. We don't have all those resources. You can't just, jump on and look and see something that's going on. So I think that that's where the challenge comes in. This is Susanna. Yeah, if there's additional grant money, hopefully that grant money can be utilized to create more signed content to give students understanding about finances in their native language. I think that's definitely what's needed, to have that real life experience. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Samantha. This is Todd. Go ahead, Samantha.
Right. I wanted to add that I'm not sure how comfortable teachers are, but sometimes students learn the best when a teacher makes a mistake. They say, oh, wow, you got that wrong too. Mary Ellen says, yeah, that empathy component. This is Samantha. Right. When they say, oh, wow, you messed up there. Okay, let me tuck that away so I won't do that. But again, as I said when I started, I'm not sure how comfortable a teacher would be doing that. Right. But that could be a learning moment for students.
This is Todd. Yeah, another solution could be is you don't have to actually teach it. Just plant seeds. Like the first 5 minutes you're talking about, credit card. It's really important to talk about the credit card and your credit score or what the interest rates are, and just kind of throwing that out there, maybe in a history lesson, explaining where all this came for and why is a credit score important and why was credit scores developed. And if you keep planting these seeds, students are going to ask questions, and then they'll start to do some investigating on their own. Maybe during lunch, they'll sit down and ask questions and say, hey, in class, we were talking about this. What do you think about that? I think just planting a seed really can help. You don't have to spend an entire hour of a class talking because, of course, you don't have time for that. You've got other subjects you're teaching, math, history, English. But planting those seeds is something that could be very beneficial. This is Susanna. I think it depends on the program, but really what's important is to have to encourage students to have conversations with their parents and learn from their parents. I think that's important. I think having ASL videos created about these topics. I think having guest speakers come into a classroom, talk about credit cards. I mean, here was somebody came in and talked, they had 23 credit cards. They were like, look at me. But now they're understanding and why, oh, this might not have been such a good
I
idea.
wouldn't be able to do that. 23 credit cards. Wow.
Right. So invite a guest speaker to come in to talk about credit cards and bring somebody in to say why this is a good or a bad thing.
This is Samantha. Wow. Mary Ellen says, yeah, I might do some of that because that is shocking. 23 credit cards. Wow.
Yeah. All
Let's
right.
move
Let's
on to the
move on
fourth
to our
question,
last
Todd.
question. This is Todd. Let's move on to our last question. So this is the hot button topic. And I feel like students, they're bright, they read, they write, they sign an ASL beautifully. They feel like they know a little bit more about personal finance than students who are language deprived, don't have a good understanding of the English language, and they struggle a little bit more. Do you think that that's true?
This is Samantha. I'd have to say no. I don't think intelligence level comes to play in this arena. I don't think that matters. And I'll share something that I've experienced in the last few years. At Fremont, the high school system is changing just a bit. They didn't feel they were fitting in with the current students. They had an old program out of the 80s, which is 30 years ago. And so they followed or used a design thinking method, which has 5 levels, beginning with empathy, synthesis, ideation, prototypes, and repetition. So if the prototype doesn't work, you repeat the cycle. So during the empathy and synthesis stage is when you develop empathy with the students, your current students. I shadow them as a student myself. I also have conversations with former students and parents of former students, really across the board. There are a lot of stakeholders in this design program. We collect that data and then synthesize it. We put together the common theme. And one of those common themes that has risen is that people don't have any experience when it comes to personal finance, and it's an area of huge struggle. And so we've identified all students across the board, from what we call alternative curriculum students, which are formerly known as special needs students, to students that don't have those needs. Regardless the intelligence level, they all struggle across the board. And so that puts an end to that discussion and really simplifies the fact that all students need a personal finance education. And we need to do that in order to prepare them for transition after graduation. So we need to develop curriculum with that intent. And hopefully that can be done within a couple of years. Of course, COVID got in the way of our program. So we are looking to finish that program in a couple of years. And so the state of California is looking to provide that as a mandated required class and not as an elective anymore.
This is Susanna. As an undergrad, when I was at Gallaudet, I knew nothing. I mean, it doesn't matter, your science, technology, engineering, mathematics. You're not required to take personal finance. Those students in those STEM majors are missing out on that. They're missing out on that exposure that they should be required to take. So it's a challenge. So I think that the CSD Learns curriculum that they've developed, I think that if schools can start to utilize that and have undergrads required to take these courses, they would understand more. But unfortunately, it's not a required course for many students. This is Todd. I noticed a lot of college students or students who are going to college, they, skip ahead by having, they skip some of those experiences of personal finance. Whereas those who went into workforce instead of going to college right out of high school have a better understanding. That alternative program that you're talking about, where I know in my old school, they called it work-life experience, where students will start to work while they're in high school, and they're a student in high school and they're working, and they look at whatever their interests are, their skills. And those students seem to have a better grasp of personal finance than those who are college bound, ready to jump into college. You know, the other students have been working, they've earned a paycheck, they opened a bank account, whereas college students may not be in that way. So we really can't assume that because somebody might be perceived to be more intelligent, more literate, therefore they have a better grasp of personal finance.
This is Samantha. Even some of my adult friends struggle with personal finance to this day. And they're the same age I am. I'm in my 30s. And these are brilliant people that I know, yet they still have a struggle. So I think intelligence has no play in this matter. And this is Mary Ellen. Despite that, a lot of people also believe that if you're smart, you must attend college. But intelligence has nothing to do with college. There's no connection there. There's no correlation. Some people don't see how college fits into their future life plans, and they don't want to attend college. Some people would rather pick a field, a trade, and get into that. And some people feel they're smarter than others because they're not getting into debt by going to college. So, I mean, who's to say who's right and who's wrong in that situation? But that is something that I see quite repeatedly. And thank you for your feedback, folks here. I really appreciate that from the panel.
All right, well, we've only got 8 minutes left.
Yikes.
And I want to talk a little bit more about the resources and answer some of the questions that our Q&A, that is in our Q&A. Do either of you want to talk a little bit about these? So this is Susanna. There are 4 of us that we have written a paper together talking about personal finance, real life experience with quantitative reasoning, and comparing that and comparing these programs of ALEKS and MathLab and the digital adaptive learning, and why, and explaining why some of these are better than other. The PowerPoint shows the courses that we have. There's a spreadsheet and how you can use the PowerPoint and use the statistics using student surveys and the way our course is designed for the classroom, for the students to actually work with one another. Having the PowerPoint using the furniture, for example, it's really nice. You know, Gallaudet purchased this particular type of technology and furniture for us to use to be able to have these case studies and work together with the students. This is Todd. Yeah, we will send everybody this information via email, so don't feel like you need to write down everything. You will get this information. This is Susanna. In 2017, these are some of the tools that we used for teaching one of our courses. And we have lots of tools that we utilize. And it's really wonderful. This is Todd. There are different apps that you can use and click on to see what other options are out there. And if you click on each app, you can learn a little bit more about them. All right, well, we have a list of questions. Oh my. We will try our best to answer as many of these as possible. Mary Ellen, you want to take the first one?
Sure, Todd. It says, do you feel that teaching finance at the high school level should be a semester or a full year curriculum to comply the other state requirements for the students? And this is Samantha responding. That really is going to depend on those state requirements because all states are different. But I believe if at least there was a full semester of personal finance, I think that would suffice. I'm pretty sure just a full semester would work. And to your question, Mary Ellen, my response is no, it might not be enough. I would say again, hearing youth in comparison to deaf youth, the deaf youth need more time to be able to absorb the information, to be able to fill in the gaps. And I think that it would be safe to say that for the deaf youth, of course, it would take more than one semester of personal finance at the high school level.
This is Susanna. We have an 8-week course that we teach of the personal finance and an 8-week course of statistics, and it's not enough. We really need a full semester about it. This is Todd. Yeah, the more the better. I completely agree. If we can stretch the course and go a little more in depth and give a little more information, I think students would retain the information more. All right, moving on to our next question. Somebody was asking about the curriculum that's used to teach the finance. What curriculum and what particular courses, where that material is, what do you typically use and where do you get that information from? This is Susanna. I use the MyLab Math. There's a new Gaze article that it talks a lot about the personal finance. It's a short list, but it's really nice. And it utilizes Excel for personal finance reasons. This is Todd. I remember there was a webinar that we had. Oh, I loved it. It was Next Gen. And the next
Right. This is Samantha. I've seen that before.
Oh, the curriculum that was in there was great. It was for middle school and high school, and you can pick and choose from that. Different ideas, different worksheets regarding personal finance. And now, Susanna, you're talking about with Excel and with Gaze. These are great resources that are out there. Mary Ellen, did I miss any? Any other resources that you can think of? This is Susanna. You know, a textbook doesn't say everything. A textbook might mention refinancing, but it doesn't talk about what a recast is. I had to learn that to recast a loan is great. You don't have to waste 5 years and start all over again in a 30-year time period. You can just recast after a shorter time, and then you still have just the 25-year left of your loan. And there are many finance companies that will offer a recast instead of a refinance, but textbooks don't talk about that. Maybe we should put that into a textbook. All right, this is Todd. Question number 3, Mary Ellen, go ahead.
Out of the videos you shared, which one would be good to use at the high school level? I think, Susanna, you are the one that mentioned videos. You were talking about using some videos in your curriculum, right?
This is Susanna. I used Camtasia and turned the sound off. It was really great. And then now I use the Video Leap. That's the name of an app. It's pretty inexpensive. It's like $35 per year, or you could do a one-time investment of $69. And that was great. And you can turn the sound off and you can plug it into an iPad. It's a really nice app to utilize. It has lots of videos that come on. I really like to utilize that. Actually, a student is the one that told me about Video Leap. I didn't find it, a student did.
Okay.
All right, this is Todd. Anybody add anything else? All right, let's move on to our next question. I'm going to try to answer as many of the questions as we can. We may not get to all of them. So question number 4. So if a deaf student of color has a fear regarding money and finances, but they're, as a common thing with deaf students, they're sheltered by their parents, kind of like as Sam had mentioned. How do you empower them? Some of these students have independent living skills because they're living in a dorm. And who's the person that they're going to be learning from their senior year? Who are they learning from? Who are they asking those questions from to get that independent living skills? And if they're not getting enough of that, how do they get more resources for financial literacy and personal finance understanding? So how can we make more resources available to students of color if they're afraid to start asking about money?
This is Samantha responding. I think what would help is having resources ready and available to be able to provide that support. Maybe having a hotline, maybe having a place where students or deaf youth can find information accessible in sign language. As already mentioned, CSD Learns has some of this available. Maybe if a student sees a word that they hadn't seen before, they might not want to explore or ask because of being embarrassed of not knowing, having to admit that they don't know that particular word. Maybe if they make a note of it, they could use the resources to find out what it meant. And I think more teachers should do what you do, Todd, is invite the students to a lifelong relationship where they can be in touch whenever they have any informational needs. I think it's important to make deaf youth feel comfortable in knowing that they can ask questions of anyone.
So I just wanted, this is Susanna, Kramer Financing in Maryland, DC, Virginia. They have deaf consultants that are free for you to access to ask about investment. So I highly recommend you looking into Kramer Finance because they do have people there that can communicate with you.
And this is Samantha. There are also plenty of advocacy centers for the deaf that I'm sure would be more than happy to help with all these resources from A to Z, I'm sure. And definitely finance must be one of them.
This is Todd. I agree about that with Rena. With, right now resources are great, but with COVID, everything's been online and students are actually having a lot more opportunity to learn things than they would have in class. And so we need to think about what's going to happen, these videos and these abundance of videos that are made. And one of the things that I've noticed is during COVID time, what's been really important with these videos is to have these resources available. Because, teachers are still learning and developing and doing things on their own. They might be giving just a simple description, but a video that could then explain it more would really help and benefit these students. I really wish that we could answer more questions, but we are so out of time.
Yeah, we're 3 minutes past even.
Ooh. Wow. And we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions that we won't be able to answer. I am so sorry that we don't have time. It's not that your questions are not valuable to us. I wish we had 2, 3, 4 hours to talk about this, but we need to respect everyone's time. So we are going to go ahead and wrap up now.
Yes, Todd, thank you. We will wrap up tonight. Folks in the audience, thank you for your participation. With all the questions we received, I think this is a fantastic conversation. The chat is blowing up as well. We appreciate your experience. We appreciate your input, your advice. Everything tonight was fantastic. Thank you, folks, for taking the time to join us. Hopefully, we can do it again soon.
Yes, we've enjoyed
and this is Samantha. Yes, I'm thrilled to have been invited and really glad I got an opportunity to share. Thank you.
This is Susanna. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, folks.
This is Todd. Wow. 1 hour.
We always run out of time, Todd.
Yeah, we always think we're going to have 15, 20 minutes left for question and we don't, but let's go ahead and wrap up and tell you a little bit about some more additional resources that are there to you. As Susanna had mentioned, CSD Learns has some videos ready talking about debt, talking about business tools, as well as their business toolkits that you'll get this information via email after the webinar. Wells Fargo has a hands-on banking. It's not necessarily in ASL, but there is information regarding hands-on for students to experience what it's like regarding banking and how to deal with personal finance. And thank you all for joining us. We had a wonderful audience today. I think that this has been our most active audience that we've had thus far.
Definitely. And Todd, this is a good problem. It's a happy issue to have.
So we will be having our webinar again next month. So please look online and hopefully you can join us again next month.
And this is Mary Ellen. Yep. I look forward to seeing you all next month as well. Bye-bye. Have a good night.
Good night.